I'm going to try and keep this brisk because I'm fanging for a beer. My name is Nick Green. I'm Policy Advisor to the Shadow Assistant Treasurer Andrew Lee in the Australian Parliament, and I have to thank him for being very forward-thinking about cooperatives and also for being super chill about me going over the other side of the world and talking about a policy area that we're working on. I want to shoot out a thanks to Melina Morrison as well, who's the head of the Australian Business Council of Co-ops and Mutuals. She was very busy with the BCCEM Leaders Summit that was last week, and she put forward my name in her place. She would have been speaking for you. She is a class act. She's one of the true leaders of co-ops in Australia, and thank you, Trevor, for humouring me. It's good to follow Darren because he touched on a lot of important context in the Australian context, so we're part of the Aussie cohort here. And I'll quickly flick through the slides when they come up, but rising inequality is an issue in Australia, as are declining living standards and increasing underemployment and insecure work and declining social capital. And I think one point I wanted to cover is that I think we're overstating the role of globalization. I kind of want to call bullshit on that. The kind of factors that lead to this policy situation that we're in are set at a national level most of the time. And to cite a recent Chris Dillo article, he's a fantastic UK economist, trade union decline, financialisation, skill-based change, power-based technological change, lower minimum wages, weaker welfare states and productivity decline are some of the most significant factors. And now the kind of these have come about by policies that are written by and for the benefit of rich old white dudes. And that's a pernicious sort of libertarianism that the end state is probably neo-feudalism. So yeah, we got to kind of state that, but globalization in many ways is actually kind of awesome. Anyway, we tend to see social and economic tools available to us as being the sole domain of either government or markets, and that's a false binary. You guys know that. I got some data about the number of co-ops, but Darren covered that. Now, how do I operate this?
Just press a button.
Okay. Okay, so let's jump ahead. So there you can see rising inequality in Australia, living standards in decline, wage growth and underemployment are big problems, and we currently have a situation where there are an estimated 80,000 adult Australians who did some sort of work in the gig economy in 2015. That's less than 0.5% of the workforce, and including rentals like Airbnb, we're looking at about 0.7% of the working population. We recently had a Senate Economics Reference Committee, and it made 17 bipartisan recommendations in its report into cooperatives, mutual and member-owned firms, and that came down in March 2016. The recommendations related to facilitating greater access to capital for cooperatives without affecting their mutual structures. It ensured representation in policy discussions, quality data, education, red tape, and government grants. Broadly speaking, the governing coalition parties, the opposition Labor Party, for which I work, and some independent parties have all expressed support for cooperatives and embracing the digital economy. So this is the major parties in Australia have outlined their policy directions for the digital economy, and unfortunately neither have explicitly stated platform cooperatives yet. However, it is my view that we need a political system that champions models of collaboration like platform cooperatives in the economy, particularly to enable workers to receive a fair share for their labour and to champion the reforms of this Senate inquiry. I would like to note that the Labor Party has shifted direction as of Wednesday last week. We confirmed that we have a shadow minister responsible for member-owned firms, my boss, and committing on Wednesday to ensure fairer access to capital based on those inquiry recommendations. The most significant limitation on cooperatives, including platform cooperatives, has been inequitable access to capital. It's a constraint on the growth of cooperatives and inhibiting their ability to best meet the needs of their members. In turn, platform cooperatives can engage with and inform political parties in some ways that I will outline. The key issue is for both to shape the digital economy in ways that do not leave anyone behind. So in Australia's working rights framework, we have a national minimum wage. It's comparably high by international standards. And we also have 10 national employment standards that have to be provided to all employees. These are incredibly important existing institutions that we need to convey to the digital economy. As you all know, workers are at a disadvantage with bargaining power. The economic term is dynamic monopsony. I hope you all go home and I don't know, chat someone up with it, because it's actually, another point I wanted to add is last night we had a very conflicting situation in Australia that is kind of representative of a lot of the partisan politics that are going on globally. We had the Victorian Premier announce, both for his state, but championing it for a national level, of a particular form of leave for employees who are victims of domestic violence. Now, I think that's an incredibly important initiative, and it should be welcome. At the same time, in New South Wales, there's a by-election, and it was won by the Shooters and Fishers Party, who are you can pick up the name. You guys know where they're going with that. So, barring a landmark court case, such as the one we've just seen in the UK, is something of a harvester case moment for the digital economy, perhaps, the Australian system is likely to continue to view the gig economy workers as independent contractors, ineligible for the same entitlements and collective bargaining frameworks as employees. Independent contractors amount for approximately 9% of the Australian workforce. Given work done via gig economy platforms is rapidly growing, the pertinence of platform cooperatives lies in arresting the slide of employee protections that could accompany an increase in contract labour. The size and scope of the gig economy is uncertain, as there are unintended consequences from a regulation. Sorry, what I'm trying to say is we don't know the scope of the sector. We don't know what new regulations could result in. So platform co-ops form an integral middle interregnum, I guess. Platform cooperatives are well suited to self-regulate the following: greater cohesiveness of purpose on a platform, minimum wages and hours, clear information about risks and rewards, internal unfair dismissal procedures, the use of a platform infrastructure to assist members with their tax affairs, and use membership to access insurance and workplace compensation schemes, or incorporate this into membership fees. Indeed, some products could be provided by existing member-owned insurance providers. They can demonstrate by way of positive contrast that some platforms engage in unconscionable conduct and unfair contract terms under the Australian Consumer Law, are harsh and unfair under the Independent Contractors Act, and inform independent regulators such as the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission and Fair Work Australia on their guidance regarding the digital economy. And they are also a means to effectively collectively bargain without needing regulator authorisation, normally required for independent contractors. I'm going to quickly turn to retirement savings. We have a system called superannuation where employers pay 9.5% on top of a salary into a pension fund. One thing is with our platforms, an existing case of bureaucratic infrastructure is that the Australian Tax Office has a superannuation clearinghouse to assist small businesses meet their superannuation requirements while reducing red tape and costs. Basically, platform co-ops can access that in their payment dispersal mechanisms to make sure that independent contractors and gig economy workers don't lose out on retirement savings. I did mention earlier that cooperatives are at a disadvantage in accessing capital. We've proposed a series of regulatory and legislative changes. You probably should just hit me up for the technical details. They're pretty sexy. Productivity. Paul Krugman's quote from The Age of Diminishing Expectations captures why productivity is the primary means of lifting the material well-being, as you can read the quote there. Of course, if labour income fails to keep pace with productivity growth, then productivity alone will not raise living standards, and that happens to be the case in Australia at the moment. Basically, you'll see the declining capital productivity. That basically means the managerial class are shithouse managers. Worker ownership is a really good way of addressing the problems with returns on capital. The digital economy, many observable signs of productivity may not be picked up by traditional productivity measures. And I'm just going to skip ahead. And I think it's going to be the case with platform cooperatives as well. Nonetheless, we are finding an increasing empirical evidence that finds cooperatives are more productive. Intuitively, this makes sense. Democratic control and having something at stake will have productivity effects. It's a simple matter of incentives. So the point here is quite broad. There's some really awesome productivity articles. Check out the slides. I'll share them with you. Anyway, the point here is quite broad. There is reason to believe platform cooperatives will facilitate productivity improvements both in terms of the short-term and the medium-term management decisions, but also protecting workers' rights and retirement savings that are long-run productivity improvements. I want to make two really quick points at the end. The Australian service sector is going to be where this has the most impact. I want to go to Mark's point yesterday about geographical stickiness. that's the caveat that comes with everything I've just described. These are going to be services that are always going to be within Australia and consumed within Australia. Two-thirds of our GDP is domestic services, and that's likely to remain the case. I also make one other final point, and that's about immigration to Australia. 1/4 of Australians are born overseas, another quarter are born to people born overseas. I fucking love immigration, and there's so much we have to learn from it. We unfortunately have a case where migrants are at a structural disadvantage. There's institutionalised racism in a lot of Australian firms. Cooperatives are one factor that can help with that, not only in the sense that there's a sense of empowerment for a lot of people who might be migrants, but also there's an information exchange there. We have an increasing Asian and African Australian contingent, and I think we can learn a lot from their experiences as member-owned firms are part of many of those countries from which they have come. I'd like to thank you very much for your time, and thank you for putting up with my brisk tone.